morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and thank you for joining me here in Season 5-ish of the Logical Christian Podcast. I'm your Logical Christian, Dan Irwin. If you're here for what to think, you've come to the wrong place. I'll give you my view on current events, politics, science, religion, and whatever else from a logical, most importantly, a Christian worldview. But this is more about how to think. Don't just accept what you're told, ask questions and dig deep. Links for the material are in the notes if you'd like to follow along, and with that, let's go be logical Christians. Basic instructions before leaving Earth. Best information before life ends. Biblical insights for basic living every day. Book inspired by Lord Eternal. Those are all acronyms that have been attributed to the letters that spell out Bible, and although that word is not an acronym, those aren't half bad, if you wanted to have a little fun with the name. The Bible, or back in the Old Testament days, the Law or the Law and the Prophets, the Torah or the Scrolls, all of these have what humans need for life and godliness. And although we all know that the Bible isn't a comprehensive book on all things, we should all equally know that what it does speak on, it speaks with ultimate authority, and a number of implications can be drawn from what the Bible explicitly says. So why not just read the Bible and trust what it says? Why do we feel like we need to jazz it up, make it more applicable, or add to it, or contradict it because we think we know better, or just downright ignore it altogether? On today's episode, first, we're going to infinity and beyond, and also beyond. Then we'll go back in time and be all judgmental. And finally, we're going to read about getting all that pesky stuff out of Christianity to make it more acceptable to man. And it's about time. So strap on that helmet, Space Cadet, get ready to wag your head in total disgust, and finally grab a coffee from the Hebrews Cafe so you can go get your church on. Because, as the good book probably says, here we goeth. When I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. Except the problem is that not everyone who isn't a child has taken the path of 1 Corinthians 13:11. There are some adults who just refuse to grow up. Some of them are just silly heads. Some of them are just kind of dumb as a bag of hammers. And some just live in a land of fantasy and make-believe. Now, this life of playing pretend can manifest itself in different ways. Take, for instance, the so-called self-proclaimed, inexplicably popular prophetess, I say while making massive air quotes with my fingers, Kat Kerr. Now, Kat is an 81-year-old, pink-haired, probably pink-wigged, I'm assuming, charismatic charlatan who claims to have visited heaven over 1,000 times since her first trip about 30 years ago in 1996. That's an average of about once every 10 days for 30 years. I don't know what kind of frequent flyer program she has, but her miles have to be off the chart. She also likes to go to the coastlines a few days before hurricanes hit with her little staff, and she just commands the hurricanes to disperse or turn around or whatever. She does the same thing with wildfires, volcanoes, and whatever natural disaster she chooses. Now, so far her track record is 0. Now, I'm sure she's figuring out her wand of power. She'll get there eventually. She was also caught up into heaven back in 2018, and she was told who the next 5 presidents were going to be. Now, you may be curious. I was curious, so I looked them up. So starting in January of 2017, well, it'll be Trump for 2 terms. This is consecutive terms. Then Mike Pence for 2 terms. And then whoever Pence chose as his vice presidential running mate. She didn't have a name, but he'll take a turn as president. Now you know me. I'm not overly political. I don't keep up with the goings-on in the world of politics. But upon asking Jeeves, it doesn't appear that came to fruition. Oh, please correct me if I've been given wrong information. And despite that, she's still listened to and somewhat revered by the kooky charismatics. So back to my premise of adults in the land of make-believe, Kat Kerr has some very interesting information regarding what heaven contains. And of course she would. She's been there over 1,000 times. So, she's seen things. Now, I feel like you may be interested in this first-hand wisdom, shall we say, by our heavenly traveler. Now, first, there are homes and living spaces. That kind of seems obvious. Don't think we disagree, generally speaking. Now, we'll each get our own enormous mansion, potentially custom built based on our earthly desires and rewards. In addition to your own personal mansion, we may also have like a family mansion for our family community. That's nice. But we don't just get a big empty house. No, I mean, how boring would that be, right? I mean, thanks for the big house, Jesus, but is that the best you can do? And no, it's not. No, each house is chock full of treasures and gifts from both God and our family members who arrived in heaven before us. Now, when you make your grand entrance into heaven, I mean, it's party time. Party on, party people. Let me hear some noise. DC's in the house. Jump, jump, rejoice. There's a party over here. There's a party over there. Wave your hands in the air. Shake your derriere. And this party will be taking place in the throne room itself. And it may last for a long time, she tells us. Now you'll reunite with family members who come complete with gifts that they're going to give you. Jesus himself gives you a golden key that unlocks your personal garden. You get your rewards that you earn from life, a lot of very fancy, symbolic type gifts, and that's fun. And although there isn't any marriage, you will have close family relationships. Moving on, I think one of my favorites, unlimited food. So we're going on a cruise toward the end of the year, and one thing I'm simultaneously looking forward to and terrified of is the unlimited food that's part of our package. Now, if the wife doesn't reel me in, I could see me grazing myself all the way to Dr. Now. But here's the thing. Turns out Jesus has a sweet tooth. I mean, who knew, right? Well, Prophetess Kat Kerr knew. I mean, that's the one who knew. So there's pizza, there's ice cream, there's swimming pools of whipped cream, chocolate mountains and waterfalls. I mean, Jesus just might be Willy Wonka, or vice versa. An entire land made of Jell-O, the Jell-O kingdom, and there are absolutely no consequences, regardless of how much you eat, much like I envision this upcoming cruise. Heaven has amusement parks with roller coasters that ride on a cushion of light. There are sports arenas, concerts, movie theaters, art galleries, and restaurants. And just in case you're concerned, yes, it's all free. Now, she does want you to know that Jesus does enjoy playing sports, but, well, he always wins. Now, I'm assuming that's because Michael Jordan hasn't died yet. I mean, a matchup for the ages, right? We can take flying lessons, and if we're really lucky, we'll be taught by Superman himself, Christopher Reeve. As for locations, obviously, in addition to the Jell-O Kingdom, there's a Christmas town. There are rooms for coloring Easter eggs because, I mean, how could Jesus deny eggs and bunnies for Easter? That's what Easter's all about, Charlie Brown. Rooms for wrapping presents and so on. There's, of course, the throne room, the city with the streets of transparent gold, which is the only kind of gold I have, the kind you simply can't see, or touch, or possess, or own. We have the Crystal Sea, the Hall of Nations, Passionate Paradise, Technos City, and nurseries for babies who either died or were aborted prior to being born. Parents will now have a chance to raise those children to adulthood. And maybe best of all, there's a portal for our dearly departed to look down upon the earth to those of us, at those of us still remaining. And wow, do I hope that's not true. There are cows driving tractors, which makes sense since all animals and pets will be in heaven and will basically be like people. The Holy Spirit is blue, goes by the nickname of Bob. Why is it these charismatics always envision the Holy Spirit as being blue? Is it literally because they see him as the genie from Aladdin? Because I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Oh yeah, Blue Bob. Blasphemy. I'll start with B. How ironic. So yeah, there's a lot more. I mean, there would have to be. She's been to heaven every 10 days for 30 years, so I think it's safe to say that, Kat has seen some things. She has seen some interesting things. I'm just glad she's been able to speak about what she's seen in heaven. Too bad the Apostle Paul wasn't as holy or spiritual as Kat. He just wasn't allowed to speak about his time in heaven. Well, hopefully he's learned his lesson by now. So if you'd like to learn more, and how could you not want to learn more, you can buy Kat's books and look at her illustrations, go to her website, or you can just fall down and hit your head a bunch of times. You'll probably see a lot of the same things yourself. It'll be neat. But believe it or not, the crazy wackadoodle that is Kat Kerr isn't the topic of conversation in this fine segment. No, we're going to talk about other adults who also continue to live in the land of make-believe, albeit a different land of make-believe than Kat. I think her land has all the crazy it can handle, all full up, no vacancy. No, these adults are actually normalish, respected members of society even. They're just kind of out there in what they believe to be true. But we accept it because it's dressed in the acceptable garb of science. Found on PopularMechanics.com, headline, "Scientists are pretty sure they found a portal to the fifth dimension." Now we know that the first three dimensions are, say it with me, solid, liquid, and gas. No, I'm just kidding. The first three dimensions are length, width, and height. That's why a 3D movie is one that seems to pop off the screen. The fourth dimension used to have only one definition, time. But now President Trump is oft said to be playing 4D chess, which chess, by definition, is 4D, as it has length, width, height, and it's beholden to time. So wouldn't 4D chess just be chess? Let's ignore what Trump may or may not be doing at any given point. I mean, who really knows what he's doing? I'm not convinced Trump knows what he's doing half of the time. Not like President Joe Autopen Potato Head, who would have no way of telling you for certain if he was wearing pants at any given time. No, I just think Trump prattles or just kind of thumbs his stream of consciousness on his phone. And sometimes, a surprisingly large amount of times, it actually seems to work. So, look, ignoring Trump and the drooling vegetable that preceded him, the fourth dimension is time. So we've got space and we've got time. You and I live in 4 dimensions. Now, we live in space. We're not overly concerned with trying to manipulate that necessarily. We live in time. We'd very much like to be able to manipulate that. But as of now, only 2 stoners in a phone booth, a crazy wild-eyed scientist, and a kid in a DeLorean, 4 guys with a hot tub, guy with a kind of sleigh-looking thing with big whirling discs and a bunch of levers, or a number of the same guy in an old British police box actually know how to do that. One day, though, someone from the future will come back and tell us how it's done. But for now we have a 5th dimension. Whatever could that be, you may ask? Well, the byline to the article states, quote, "It's probably in this weird particle." Okay. And the picture they chose for the article was a road on a starry night, pine trees and tall grass on the shoulder. They really kind of need to mow. And a white, light-emanating rectangular door or portal-looking thing just kind of standing vertically in the middle of the road. It seems like that's larger than a particle, but I'm not the illustrator or the scientist. The writer of the article, sweet Caroline Delbert, and I guess the 5th dimension scientists want to make sure you're totally lost just right off the bat. So she starts you off with this doozy, quote, "Scientists say they can explain dark matter by positing a particle that links to a 5th dimension." Okay, so we've spoken of dark matter in the past. This is a completely theoretical concept used to explain what scientists have no explanation for. I'm going to give you what I remember off the top of my head. We'll correct as we go if the article goes any deeper into any sort of explanation. What we know is that in space there are the appearances of large gravitational forces that we don't know where they come from. The theory, if I recall correctly, traces back to the Big Bang with the idea that for every particle of matter, there's a particle of dark matter that balances it out. The dark matter can't be seen, but it has mass and it can exert gravitational forces just like light or normal or visible matter. The theory states that we should have an equal amount of dark matter because if we have more of one than the other, it would create an instability in the universe, and that would cause us problems. I think kind of like eating itself, for lack of a better term. If you have more dark matter, it would basically eat the regular matter until the balance is achieved. I might be wrong on that, but I don't really care enough to look it up. It's something like that. I know I'm close. The problem is that we have a calculated 3-to-1 dark matter to light matter composition in the universe. That shouldn't exist. But due to what appears to be gravitational forces that hold the universe together with no obvious force-producing body, that's what science, we'll leave the air quotes off of that for right now, has determined must exist in the universe. Like 75% dark matter. Now, scientists really want to be able to explain where this dark matter comes from and why we have so much of it, and how the universe hasn't eaten itself because of it. And this is where we must step into Fantasyland, deeper into Fantasyland. Back to the opening line, quote, "Scientists say they can explain dark matter by positing a particle that links to a fifth dimension." The word positing is an interesting word in the sentence. It actually does all of the heavy lifting of the theory, to be honest. To posit is to assume. In other words, they're just assuming something, making something up out of whole cloth to fix their scientific conundrum. Now, I remember back in college, in the library, studying for a test. There were a few of us in there all studying for the same test, although not necessarily studying together. But as we were trying to figure out a formula for something, and I don't remember what it was anymore, we banded together to figure out how they got from A to B with the formula we were given. The dim bulbs above our heads crackled to life when I found, in a different book, that the one variable we were perplexed on, that we were desperately trying to figure out, was literally anything we wanted it to be. Now, the creator of the formula was like, put in all these values, figure out what you want on the other side, and then just make that variable whatever you need it to be to get you there. We were gobsmacked. Yeah, you heard me right. How is that possible? Now, we could have been wrong, but that variable was basically a magic number. And that's what this particle linking dark matter to the fifth dimension thing appears to be. We don't know how or if this even exists. We don't know how or if this thing exists. We don't know how or if this other thing exists. But if we link them together with a magic particle, then everything works out. Science! So what exactly is the fifth dimension? Well, a post on X from Astronomy Vibes gives a quick description of the fifth dimension. I guess with credit to NASA, Scientific American, and CERN. Quote, "The fifth dimension is one of the most mind-bending ideas in theoretical physics, a concept that stretches far beyond our three spatial dimensions and time itself." Let's pause there. So, theoretical physics. People are literally paid, through various forms of private or public funding, or both, to sit and think about what might be. And honestly, no fantasy is too crazy, somehow. I'm fairly convinced that about 90% of theoretical physics is just some dude in a lab coat that he wears literally all the time, at home, at work, in the shower, and all the buttons are off by one, sitting down to watch a sci-fi movie, and then he grabs some crazy, just out there idea from the movie, brings it back into the office as his latest theory. Now, I wonder if I can con my boss into letting me do my job theoretically. Theoretical data analysis, theoretical Excel spreadsheet creation, theoretical meetings. Of course, knowing my boss, she's pretty quick. She would be fine with that, as long as I was okay with a theoretical paycheck. Let's continue. I'm not okay with that. Quote, "While we can move forward and backward in time or space," and I want to hold up there, space, yes, we can move in space. Time? Is this new information? Then no, it's not. As I've already said, there are a limited number of individuals in very specific vehicles that can do that. You and we aren't any of them or those. Continuing on, quote, "The fifth dimension is imagined as a pathway through parallel realities, connecting worlds that began like ours but evolved differently. In theory, this dimension could allow movement between alternate timelines, universes, where each decision, from the smallest to the grandest, creates a ripple that forms a new branch of existence. It suggests that countless versions of reality coexist side by side, shaped by different outcomes of the same initial conditions." Okay. So see, this again, as always, must go back to evolution, because the idea of a creator God who created this universe and this planet and life uniquely and specifically, well, that's just not acceptable to most of mankind. But evolution, an impersonal, random chance, non-directed process with you and me, well, not you and me, with the intelligent science-talking guys being right at the pinnacle of evolution. We should bow in their general direction. And evolution is literally magic. It's all things to all people. Theoretical physics must use evolution because evolution allows them to imagine anything they want to get any outcome they want, or explain any inexplicable thing they want, etc., etc. And why would they want to do that? Well, there was a South Park episode all the way back in Season 2 in 1998 entitled Gnomes. In this episode, the boys encounter a race of small people known as the Underpants Gnomes. These are little guys that, while we sleep, come in and steal our underpants. So if you've ever wondered what happened to your favorite pair, holes and all, well, that's what happened. The Underpants Gnomes stole it. So the boys follow them back to their lair where there was a huge pile of underwear and asked them why they were stealing underpants. Well, they pulled out a flip chart with their corporate strategy, which is as follows. Number 1, steal underpants. Number 2, ? Number 3, profit. So why do theoretical physicists use evolution and do what they do? Well, number 1, evolution. Number 2, ? Number 3, paycheck. And when you look up the average salary for a theoretical physicist in the United States, you get a range of, are you ready? You're not ready for this. $200,000 to $340,000 per year, with the average being $250,000 per year to sit and think of things. Continuing on in the X-Post, quote, though purely theoretical, the idea of the fifth dimension continues to inspire scientists, philosophers, and dreamers alike. It reminds us how vast and mysterious our universe truly is, and how every choice might echo across realities unseen. It reminds us of how vast and mysterious our universe truly is? Does it? It dupes those who can't discern truth from reality, and to the rest of us, we roll our eyes at the idiocy of it. Now, can I prove there isn't a fifth dimension where everything started the same but evolved differently? Yeah, I think I can, actually. It's called common sense in a biblical worldview. Evolution, it's not a thing. If you're a Christian who believes in evolution, I'd say at best you're a Christian that's playing with absolute heresy and blasphemy. You may want to get away from that. I'd also say that you're a Christian who doesn't understand, nor do you care who God is. I'd also suggest you study evolution carefully and then set it side by side with who the Bible says God is. See, evolution simply isn't a viable, godly, or biblical worldview, and to be honest, it's not logical. There's no common sense. It's not even a good theory. Back to our article. Sweet Caroline states, quote, our knowledge of the physical universe relies on the idea of dark matter, which takes up the vast majority of matter in the universe. Dark matter is a kind of pinch hitter that helps scientists explain how gravity works, because a lot of features would dissolve or fall apart without an X factor of dark matter. Even so, dark matter doesn't disrupt the particles we do see and feel, meaning it must have other special properties as well. You see, this is just kind of a mess from start to finish. And I'm not even saying that dark matter doesn't exist. I'm just saying that scientists can't explain how this universe works. So they made up some invisible stuff and said, there you go. We figured it out. She literally said that their knowledge of the physical universe relies on the idea of dark matter. Let me just give you a tip. If your knowledge of something relies on an idea, you don't actually have knowledge. You literally have an idea that you're choosing to treat as fact and reality. That's not knowledge. That's Fantasy Island. So, we can't see dark matter. We don't know if dark matter exists. If it does, we don't know what it is. But we do know that the universe must have a balance between matter and dark matter. But we know there's a lot of gravitational forces in the universe that can't be explained, which equates to a 75-25 split of dark to regular matter. So how could that possibly be true? Well, 3 words. Warped extra dimension, or WED for short. So to boil this down for you, science can't explain how the universe works, so they made up a thing. But that thing doesn't make sense, so they made up another thing to explain the first thing. Now let me caveat this. I don't know if dark matter exists or not. Christian scientists and astronomers are mixed on the idea of dark matter. There's no question that there are forces in the universe that are doing things that we can't explain. So if you want to call whatever these forces are dark matter, that's fine. But the reality is that nobody knows what those forces are. So science, so-called, has decided it's a thing. And now they need to explain that thing. Me, I kind of feel like it's God just kind of making scientists, we'll put air quotes around that now, look silly. Because maybe it's just God that holds the universe together. Anyway. Enter what we just mentioned, the WED, the warped extra dimension, And listen to this gem. Quote, the scientists studied fermion masses, which they believe could be communicated into the fifth dimension through portals, creating dark matter relics and fermionic dark matter within the fifth dimension. Clear? I think you got it right. I mean, seriously, if you don't know what that means, what the heck is wrong with you, right? And the answer is nothing. There's nothing wrong with you. That's insane. I mean, first, fermions are subatomic particles. Think electron, protons, quarks, and leptons, and neutrons, or whatever other sort of trons and tons there are. A fermion mass is literally the mass or the weight of the particle or particles, so scientists believe there could be portals that lead to other dimensions, and these fermions travel through the portals, which means they now physically exist elsewhere, parallel, or just different dimensions. But the hole that they leave behind by traveling through these portals, well, that leaves a signature here, which we know as dark matter. Got it? No, you don't, because this is literal insanity. Now, Carolyn asks if maybe these signature holes could be the reason we have dark matter, at least some of the dark matter, and the answer is no, but nobody's told her that yet. She quotes the scientist from the study as saying, quote, we know that there is no viable dark matter candidate in the standard model of physics, so already this fact asks for the presence of new physics. And does it? Yeah, look, I'm not saying that we happen to have a lock on physics right now, that we just live in a generation after 6,000 years who finally get it, and we get all of it. There could be new physical principles to learn, I don't know. But they've made up a thing, and that thing didn't work as planned. So they keep making up things, and then they say that we're going to need new physics in order to incorporate the made-up theory about something we have no idea about. And remember, they're the science believers. People like me, well, we're the science deniers. She then comes down to the summary of the theory, and hold on to your butts, I'll try to go slow. Quote, basically, a key piece of mathematics creates bulk masses of fermions that are manifested in the so-called fifth-dimensional warp space. This pocket dark sector is one possible way to explain the huge amount of dark matter that so far has eluded detection using any traditional measurements designed for the standard model of physics. Fermions jammed through a portal to a warped fifth dimension could be acting as dark matter. Got it? So this mass of subatomic particles, electrons, protons, neutrons, quarks, leptons, and the like, they're jammed into this fifth dimensional portal, creating a massive concentration of matter that to us is invisible because it exists elsewhere, so it's dark matter, but it exists in the same coordinates in space in some other dimension from our own. But the gravitational pull, that effect, that's felt in this dimension. And I would have to assume all other dimensions at the exact same coordinates across the entire 5D portal. There. Simple, right? So she wraps up her totally scientific article with a question that I think we could all agree is a fair question. Quote, how would we observe this kind of dark matter in order to verify it? See, if you can't verify your hypothesis, then it's not a good hypothesis. Start over. I was going to say, then you have a religion, not science, but no, that's not right either. I mean, even Christianity, which is the only religion I actually care about, because it's the only actual true religion, can be verified independently, or at least large chunks of what we read in the Bible can be verified as factually and historically correct. And there were a lot of people who saw Jesus after he was supposed to be dead, so they could have verified that accuracy at that time, right? So a lot of this either was or could or can be verified. But her question is a valid one. How do we observe this in order to verify it? Well, quote, to date, this is the holdup on many different theories of dark matter. Okay, well, I mean, that's wonderful. I mean, I could have told you that. It's okay, though, because, well, the answer to this is simple. It's maybe even easy peasy lemon squeezy if I dare be so bold, and I do dare. Quote, but all it would take to identify fermionic dark matter in a warped fifth dimension would be the right kind of gravitational wave detector, something growing in prevalence around the world. Oh, well, that's all it would take. Just a warped fifth dimension fermionic gravitational wave detector? I mean, well, let me go check my shelf of special tools that I have in my garage. I'm sure I must have a fermion, one of those things, sitting there next to my EMF detector, my double flare tubing tool, my car battery tester, and my specialty bit set. I know I've seen one. What does she mean that these detectors are growing in prevalence around the world? I mean, really? People are developing things that can detect something that we're not even sure exists in a thing that's created from pure fantasy? It's impressive. I mean, if they're creating that, that is impressive. I have to agree. And sweet Caroline, does, final word, quote, indeed, the answer to the dark matter conundrum could be lurking around the corner. Could it be? Just lurking around? I mean, maybe it could, I don't know. But because of the fifth dimension, I'd have to say no on that one. That's not where it's lurking. Now, all the major branches of science came out of philosophy. They were originally pondered because man was trying to figure out who God is and what he's done. They wanted to think God's thoughts after him. They believed that in addition to the scriptures, the more they knew of and understood the creation, the more they could know of and understand God, the creator. But relatively speaking, in a very short amount of time, science was co-opted by those who didn't want a God. They wanted to be God. They wanted to make the rules. Now, science, which isn't really science at all anymore, has come full circle back to being religious. But this time, it's an atheistic religion that places man at the center of the universe, evolution as the God, and random chance as the savior. By doing this, we no longer try to figure out how things actually work and why things actually exist. We now decide first what must be, then we theorize how to make that happen. Now, look, I have no problem with theorizing. If we don't dream, we'll never develop new things and come up with new ideas or figure out how things work. But when you start with the end in mind, when you've already predetermined the end result, you're not really theorizing anything. You're just constrained to only figuring out a way that you can make that end result come true. And in the world of theoretical physics, we've come up with some of the dumbest theories to explain either what we see or to explain something in a way that's acceptable to our godless worldview. The Bible tells us very little about how things were created or how they work. God, for his own reasons, has left that to man to explore and learn. But much as Kat Kerr and people just like her are a judgment on mankind, so is a godless worldview with regard to figuring out how this creation exists and functions. Man, due to his sin, his pride, his arrogance, his refusal to allow for the existence of God, continually brings judgment on himself. Opening our Bibles, using that as our guide to all things, is the only way that we'll truly gain understanding of this universe. Answers in Genesis, the Institute for Creation Research, and a number of other organizations like them do just that. They start with God in mind, with the Bible in hand, and then they analyze what we can experience and test in an attempt to understand who this God truly is and what he's given man by his grace and mercy alone, even though we've made it imperfect due to sin. So, as with all things, start with God in mind. Make sure that God and his word are your anchor. When you read, hear, or see something, ask yourself if what you're reading is godly, and how what we know in the scriptures aligns with what we're being told. If it doesn't align, dismiss it. You'll thank me. Well, no. You'll thank God that you did. Man. Or woman, or other. No. Man or woman. That's all there is. Man, it has been a while. It's been nearly a year since we were Bereans last. Well, at least that's how long it's been since we talked about our Bereanizing, our Bereanization, if you will. Now, hopefully you've been in your Bible since we last spoke. Now, I can't say I've been in it as much as I would have liked to be, but I've been working my way through little by little. And can we just agree that focused Bible reading is hard? When you have work and home and kids, etc., that you're dealing with, and it's not like your favorite TV show. You can't just kind of sit down and veg out and read the Bible, half focus on reading the scriptures. Personally, it's really difficult for me to do it in the morning. I mean, my mind is running and firing just fine, but I don't wake up in the study mode. I mean, some people do. I just don't. I've tried it, and boy, it's hard for me to get focused. And if I wait too late in the evening, well, the mind is shutting down. Same problem. In the middle, after work and before it gets too late, there's a lot of stuff competing for just a few hours. Can't just be me, right? So look, I absolutely need to figure out my schedule, figure out how to fit in the important stuff, letting other things go. I know that. I'm aware of that. Maybe you're in the same boat. Okay, quick reminder about what we're doing here. Now, as I do read my Bible, I take notes. Why? Because that's what I do. Some people are note takers, some are underliners, some are outliners, some just like to read or listen, and it may change how you do things, how you work through the Bible each time you start over and start working through it again. Now, as of right now, I'm a note taker and an underliner. I take fairly comprehensive notes, probably too many, it slows me down, but there are things that jump out at me in those notes. There are things that I throw a star or a few stars next to in my notebook, and those are the things I want to bring here. Now, maybe something I hadn't seen before, something that connected to something else, something that shocked me, or something that brings up questions in my mind, or whatever. And that brings me to this.
We at the Logical Christian Podcast greatly appreciate your continued and continual patronage of the Being Bereans segment. We at the Logical Christian Podcast strive to impart accurate and thought-provoking biblical analysis throughout the entirety of the Being Bereans segment. That said, we at the Logical Christian Podcast feel it necessary to remind you that the Being Bereans segment is comprised of the thoughts, questions, and epiphanies of the host of said Being Bereans segment, and as such, we strongly recommend that you use maximum discernment and be your own Berean, as it were, rather than just accept the information being discussed during the Being Bereans segment. We at the Logical Christian Podcast request that you send questions or comments to the Logical Christian Podcast should any questions, thoughts, epiphanies, or corrections of your own present themselves during the partaking of the Being Bereans segment. With that, we at the Logical Christian Podcast pray that you attain both enjoyment and enlightenment from the following Being Bereans segment.
See, I'm not a trained, studied theologian. I'm a knuckle-dragging mechanical engineer trying to noodle things out using logic, using what I've learned through reading, listening, and watching teachers much smarter than I. But my thoughts are mine, so there's a chance that what I'm thinking is way, way wrong. I admit that. And if I am, let me know. Your contact info is in the episode notes. I'd love to get your thoughts, your feedback, whatever, on what I'm proposing here. Okay, so let's get a move on. So back nearly a year ago, we ended our discussion with the end of the book of Joshua, which was also the end of Joshua. Now, Joshua was 110 years old when he died, and he was buried. Verse 31 of Joshua 24 is simultaneously a wonderful testament to Joshua and a sad, damning commentary on the people of Israel. Quote, "And Israel served Yahweh all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua, who knew all the work of Yahweh which he had done for Israel." So Joshua's generation, or maybe a generation past Joshua, I don't know, depending on how you count it, I don't really know, but the elders, right, that survived Joshua, that's how long they followed the teachings of Moses and Joshua, etc. I don't know what happened after that, right? But we do get a hint. We do learn, don't we? We move into the book of Judges. Now, the Israelites were now focusing on the Canaanites. They asked God which tribe should go drive them from the land. A lot of things happened at this point. Judah was chosen by God to drive out the Canaanites from the land. They captured the king and cut off his thumbs and big toes, as apparently that's what he had done to 70 other kings. He was brought to Jerusalem eventually, and he died there. And speaking of Jerusalem, they conquered and burned Jerusalem and Hebron and the surrounding area. Caleb, who was the leader of Judah, offered his daughter in marriage to whoever captured Kiriath Sephar, and I'm sure I pronounced that probably perfectly. Othniel, Caleb's nephew from his youngest brother, won that honor. So continuing on, Judah captured Gaza, Ashkelon, and essentially Ekron. They removed the three sons of Anak, some of the remaining giants in the land, and on and on. The various tribes had varying degrees of success, removing the existing people from the lands they were given. This comes back to bite them, just over and over in the future. So with that background out of the way, let's hit my starred notes, mostly at least. Chapter 2 actually backs up to when Joshua was alive and, quote, the angel of Yahweh, right? So I think, in this case, we can say this was the pre-incarnate Jesus, the angel of Yahweh. So the angel of Yahweh made a covenant with the Israelites. A side note, I may be wrong. Go back to the disclaimer. But I don't think that there are any instances where anyone ever initiated a covenant with God. It was always God with man. I know that it's believed that a covenant was made by man with God on the Mayflower, that George Washington, during his first presidential inauguration, made a covenant for the new United States with God. I know that more recently, Glenn Beck led a number of his followers or listeners in making a covenant with God. And I know that President Trump is planning on rededicating America to God as one nation under God on May 17th as part of the 250th birthday celebration year. Now, the problem I have with this is that I don't think we're able to initiate a covenant with God. Not personally and definitely not corporately. Trump can rededicate the nation as one nation under God, but we aren't. We aren't even remotely close to being one nation under God. Anyway, back to the Bible. The angel of Yahweh made a covenant with the Israelites, saying that he brought them out of Egypt. He's given them the land. Now go in there, make no covenants with any civilization currently in there, and tear down the altars, which meant pretty much wipe out all the altars, all that type of stuff, all the people. But they didn't do that. So the angel of Yahweh rescinded that covenant, or I guess enacted the penalty portion of the covenant, the punishment for them not upholding their side, and he vowed to not drive the inhabitants out for them, but he'd allow them to stay and be a thorn in the side of the Israelites. And wow, were they ever. And then we cover the death of Joshua, this time moving through the entire generation, all the elders dying also. And in chapter 2, verse 10 tells us of the condition of the next generation after all of them had died. Quote, "And there arose another generation after them, who did not know Yahweh or even the work which he had done for Israel." Really? I mean, Joshua was with Moses. Moses led them out of Egypt. Moses, as part of his parting address to the nation, the book of Deuteronomy, in chapter 4, he said, quote, "Only keep yourself and keep your soul very carefully, lest you forget the things which your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life, but make them known to your sons and to your grandsons." And I don't know, maybe he should have been more specific for them to keep going, right? Sons tell their sons, and their sons tell their sons, etc., because it was the generation after Moses where the information apparently stopped. Now, there arose another generation who did not know Yahweh or even the work which he had done for Israel. That seems impossible, but here we are. We then step into the time of the judges, and although we're quick to judge, we probably need to be really careful about doing that. Right? Verses 16 to 23, we get the summary of the book. The Israelites, who we've already established didn't know Yahweh, would be oppressed, and they would cry out to God of their fathers, because they didn't know him. God would raise up a judge who would rescue them from the oppression and tell them what they needed to do to follow Yahweh. They would do as they were told, to varying degrees. Then the judge dies, and, quote, "they would turn back and act more corruptly than their fathers in following other gods to serve them and bow down to them. They did not abandon their practices or their stubborn ways." And, of course, then the anger of Yahweh would burn against them once again. Now, are we much different, really? Am I much different? I mean, how often do I just go about diddy-bopping through life? Trouble happens in the form of, take your pick here. I suddenly remember that I should probably be praying more, or, again, reading my Bible more, and so on. God, for some reason, unbeknownst to me, has mercy on me. And that prayer and reading thing kind of heads on back to the back burner again over time. And we serve a patient God, a merciful God, but not a pushover God. He's not like many of us are, or were, as parents, counting down from 10 to give the kid a chance to stop, but then we start counting by fractions as we get to 2 and then 1. God doesn't look the other way. He doesn't excuse bad behavior, but he is patient. He's loving and merciful. He showed that with the Jewish nation over and over and over, and he's demonstrated that in my life over and over and over. Maybe you can relate. Or maybe it's just me. Yeah, it's probably just me. Now, just recently, we had an interesting quote from Pope Leo the XIV, whose real name is Robert Prevost, the first Roman Catholic Pope from the United States of America, I thank you. He made the claim that, quote, "God does not listen to the prayers of those who wage war." Now, anytime someone makes a claim about God, your first question should be something like, chapter and verse? As in, can you tell me where in the Bible you found the basis for your claim? Now, I know that the Popery is supposed to be the mouthpiece for Christ on earth, but that's only sometimes. And sometimes the Pope just spouts off stupid human words. Sometimes he says words directly from God himself, and the Pope handlers will generally tell us which words the Pope said after a few news cycles to see how those words played in the public sphere. And in this case, well, I don't believe this came from Christ, mostly because he got a lot of pushback on it. Mostly because Mr. Prevost is simply another leftist social justice warrior who doesn't really care what the Bible says about things. He cares what he thinks and wants to use his influence to try to mold the world into his vision. So he said that God doesn't listen to the prayers of those who wage war. And the implication is that God is against war, that he condemns war and warmongers. Okay, well, moving into Judges 3, starting in verse 1, we read something rather interesting. Makes me wonder, along with many other passages and accounts in the Bible, if Robert has ever read the Bible, because it seems like maybe he has not. Quote, "Now these are the nations which Yahweh allowed to remain, to test Israel by them, that is, all who had not known any of the wars of Canaan. However, God tested them in order that the generations of the sons of Israel would know war by learning war, especially those who had not known it formerly. These nations are the 5 lords of the Philistines and all the Canaanites and the Sidonians and the Hivites who lived in Mount Lebanon, from Mount Baal Hermon as far as Labo Hamath, and they were for testing Israel to know if they would obey the commandments of Yahweh, which he had commanded their fathers by the hand of Moses." So although we read earlier that the Israelites didn't follow God's command and clear out the current inhabitants of the Promised Land, we read here that God, always sovereign over all things, mind you, actually was the one who allowed these nations to stay intermixed for 2 reasons. 1, to test the Israelites to see if they would obey his commands. Spoiler alert, they did not. And 2, to teach them war, to know war by learning war. It almost seems like God isn't anti-war, that war is actually part of God's sovereign plan. All war, as God is all sovereign. And there are such things as just, righteous, and holy wars. You may not agree. Sorry, you're wrong. There are things such as just, righteous, and holy wars. Now, Pope Bob made his comments because he doesn't like President Trump, and he doesn't like the war in Iran. You can make up your own mind about Iran and Trump, but learn the background and then ask yourself why it's taken so long and why we've had so many spineless presidents who haven't gone in to neuter the evil Iranian regime. How in a civilized world have they been allowed to exist doing what they're doing this long? So chapter 3 starts us into the cycle of disobey, oppression, cry out, rescue, obey, disobey, oppression, and so on. So Israel did what was evil. The anger of Yahweh burned. They were sold into the hands of the king of Mesopotamia for 8 years. They cried out, and then we get the first judge, none other than Othniel, the nephew and son-in-law to Caleb, who we spoke of a few minutes ago. Othniel rescued them per God's sovereign plan, and then there was peace for 40 years. Then Othniel died. This is now 48 years after Joshua had died. And Israel did, guess what? What was evil? The anger of Yahweh burned, and he sold them into the hands of the king of Moab, King Eglon, via the sons of Ammon and Amalek. The Israelites were under oppression for 18 years. Then you guessed it, they cried out for a savior. 18 years. It took 18 years for them to cry out for rescue from their oppression after 40 years of freedom and peace. Seems like a lot. But they cried out, and Ehud, the second judge, was raised up to save them. Not really start of my notes, but an interesting story. A funny, maybe, kind of story, in fact. So Ehud was described as a lefty, a left-handed person. He fashioned a 2-edged sword, 1 cubit, which is about 18 inches long. That's not very long for a sword. He then fastened it to his right thigh under his cloak. The theory to the significance of this is that this is a short sword, not really one made for combat, and the king's guards would be checking for weapons before allowing anyone near the king, but most people, being right-handed, would have their sword on the left side because it's easier to draw a weapon across the body. So the size of the sword combined with the location would have made it easy to miss by the guards, especially since they weren't using metal detectors at that time. Probably. So Ehud requests and was granted an audience with King Eglon in order to bring him a tribute from the people. Now Ehud told the king, who was a very fat man, that he had a private message for him as well. So Eglon, full of pride and arrogance, sent everyone out of the room, leaving only the king and the judge. Ehud approached, grabbed his sword, and plunged it into the belly of Eglon. The Bible says that the handle and all sunk into his belly. So that would mean, if we use the properties of a circle at a minimum, you're looking at a length around his belly of about 60 inches. To have a diameter of 18 inches, the distance front to back of the circle, in order to have the entire sword buried in his body. 60 inches around the belly. And likely more, maybe a good deal more than that. So let me do some further math for you. 60 inches is 5 feet. My mom used to be about 5 feet tall. She's shrinking. My sister is maybe just over 5 feet tall. That's a lot of belly. That's a lot of belly, a long way around the belly. So the sword went in, and we're told all the fecal matter, all the intestinal goo came out. And if he's that fast, that would likely mean he had a lot of food in various levels of processing inside those innards. Ehud left his sword there, can't imagine why you'd want it back, and left, locking the doors behind him. Now the servants came, very likely smelled the smell through the door, and they figured he was probably just relieving himself. And my guess is that they were playing rock, paper, scissors to figure out which one of them was going to have to empty, this pot, this thing for the king. Eventually, they suspected something was wrong, so they unlocked and opened the doors, and they found him dead. Now, Ehud went back to Syria, not Syria, Sierra, maybe Sierra, something like that, rallied the Israelites and proclaimed to them that Yahweh has delivered the Moabites into their hands. Pursue and slaughter them. And about 10,000 Moabites, military men, were killed that day. Israel had peace after that for about 80 years. Then we have verse 31 of chapter 3, where we learn of judge number 3, who only gets really one mention in one verse. Well, maybe another one in chapter 5, but really just one mention in one verse. Shamgar, the son of Anath. Verse 1 of chapter 4 tells us that Ehud had died. I'm assuming he died prior to Shamgar, or maybe Shamgar was a judge raised up when Ehud was too old to save Israel. I really don't know. It doesn't tell us. But we learn that whatever had happened, Israel needed rescuing, and Shamgar killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad, which is a spike about 8 to 10 inches long. Remember that Samson, judge number 13, and the last pure judge, as Eli and Samuel are kind of the transition between judges and prophets, with the monarchy coming into play midway through Samuel's tenure. But Samson killed 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey, and I'll use the politically correct word here. And he was the strongest man in the Bible, or in history. So Shamgar, maybe not quite Samson level, but he had to be a beast of a man in his own right. And he only got one verse with no information as to how or why he came on the scene. So after 80 years of peace, we're now about 146 years since the death of Joshua. Moving into chapter 4, we see that Ehud had died. The Israelites were just loving God and loving their neighbor and singing, "Kumbaya, my Lord, kumbaya. Kumbaya, my Lord, kumbaya. Kumbaya, my Lord, kumbaya. Oh Lord, kumbaya." And the land was peaceful and bountiful, and no, can't do it. That's all a lie. No, they were wicked again, doing evil in the eyes of Yahweh. I know. It's probably too soon to make light of it. It's only been a handful of millennia. My apologies for being so insensitive. So Ehud dies. Apparently Shamgar was out of the picture. The Israelites did evil, and Yahweh handed them over to the king of Canaan. Now, of note was the Bible stating that the king had 900 iron chariots. Fun fact, Joshua died about 1482 BC. The Israelites were sent into this latest oppression about 146 years after the death of Joshua. So about 1336 BC. This king had 900 iron chariots. The Iron Age is thought to have started about 1200 BC, nearly 150 years after the king had 900 iron chariots. Now look, I know, the Iron Age was the period of widespread use of iron. Maybe this wasn't considered widespread use. I don't know. But the Bible speaks of iron much earlier than the supposed start of the Iron Age. So I wonder who's right. It's a mystery. Anyway, they endured severe oppression for another 20-year period, and then they finally cried out to Yahweh. Now this is when the fourth judge comes on the scene, Deborah, which is an odd name for a man, because this isn't a man. This judge was a woman. Now she was termed a prophetess, and the Israelites would come to her for her judgment on various issues. Well, one day she called for Barak, a military commander, and said, quote, "Has not Yahweh, the God of Israel, commanded, go and march to Mount Tabor and take with you 10,000 men from the sons of Naphtali and from the sons of Zebulun, and I will draw out to you Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his many troops, to the river Kishon, and I will give him into your hand." Okay, this is interesting phrasing, potentially, and keep in mind I'm reading this in English, not Hebrew, mostly because I can't read Hebrew. So what she said implies to me that Barak already knew this, that he had already been told this to go and grab the people and go and fight, and apparently Barak didn't take action. It's hard to believe that God would speak to Barak or to a prophet or to Deborah, a prophetess, relaying his message through him, and Barak didn't take action right away. In fact, he didn't take action right away after Deborah pointed out that God literally said that he would give them into his hand. And this is where I think it's generally understood why Deborah had the role of judge thrust upon her. There are a few competing thoughts as to why Deborah was chosen. I happen to believe that it's because the Israelites had a population of weak men, and this was more of a punishment or a judgment on Israel. I tend to think this because Barak, the military commander, after being told by God to fight through Deborah for possibly more than the first time, we're not really sure, he said he would do it, but only if she came with him. And even after being told that the honor wouldn't be his if Deborah did that, but would be a woman's, he was still fine with it apparently. Now, I don't know how I would have acted or reacted to a message from God, but this was a totally different time, a completely different scenario than anything I'm familiar with. So I think it matters that Barak wouldn't do what God told him unless a woman came with him, even a judge or a prophetess woman. So the day of battle came. Yahweh caused confusion. The enemy was completely destroyed except for Sisera, the commander of the Canaanite army. Now, he got off his chariot and ran away on foot. He came to a tent, the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber. Now Jael gave him drink and then covered him with a rug in order to hide him from those who were searching, or so he thought. And when he fell asleep, she picked up a tent peg, placed it ever so gently on his temple, and drove the stake through his head and into the ground. She pinned him to the ground through his head. Now Israel fought against the Canaanites and they won their freedom back. Chapter 5 is the Song of Deborah and Barak, speaking of recent history, including their latest battle. Now, interestingly, she names some of the tribes and if they help with the battle or not. The song was essentially about four people, most of four people, four groups, four topics: Deborah, Barak, the tribes of Israel, and Jael, the ten-peg lady. The first stanza is glorifying God. The second stanza starts with speaking of Shamgar, then moves into Deborah and the current day. And then towards the end, we hear about Jael and how blessed she is. Now, you can go read the song for yourself, but I found it interesting that she called out various tribes of Israel. So Ephraim and Benjamin, well, they came down as warriors. Machir, not one of the tribes, they sent commanders to fight alongside. Zebulun fought with Deborah and Barak. Issachar fought with them, faithfully following Barak. Reuben did not help them in the battle. They sat in the sheepfolds. Gilead stayed on the other side of the Jordan. Dan stayed in his ships. Asher stayed by the sea in their landings. Naphtali, however, fought valiantly with the others. So she put Reuben, Gilead, Dan, and Asher on blast for doing nothing to help their brothers. And why not? I mean, come on. Don't be lazy, guys. Let's go. Anyway, after this battle and victory, there was peace once again, this time for 40 years, at the end of which brings us to 206 years since the death of Joshua. That's 200 years and only 5 chapters, moving right along. Wouldn't it be interesting to know a lot more about what exactly happened during those many years? I think it would be. But we get what we get, and we don't throw a fit. And I think that's where we're going to stop for this segment. Now, as I said earlier, looking back, we quite often shake our heads and click our tongues. How could the Israelites just keep going back to evil? Why didn't they learn their lesson the first time? And really, the situation is different. But aren't we all the same as the Israelites? Don't we just keep returning to our pet sins, keep doing evil, in a manner of speaking, in the eyes of the Lord? I mean, yes, we can judge the Israelites for their disbelief, for their wishy-washiness, but at the same time, we need to look at the log in our own eye because we're all humans. We're all sinful, and sin is a brutal thing. It's very sneaky and slippery and convincing and enticing. When we read these stories of the Israelites and their struggles, ebbing and flowing into sin, crying out, being rescued, living a blessed life, then desiring or pursuing sin again, etc., we need to see a few things. 1, this is why we need a Savior, a perfect Savior. We can't do this on our own, and we can't do this by ourselves. There has only been one human who is able to not give in to the temptation of sin. 2, our tendency over time is to migrate back to sin. We're no different than the children of Israel in this respect. We can point at them, but we must realize that there are 3 other fingers pointing back at ourselves. This is why we must get in the Bible and pray and strive and work to achieve sanctification to the best we can before we're called home. And then 3, we should treat this as a cautionary tale, but also as confidence that for God's true children, He will be faithful, even when we aren't. And although we may not always know what God is doing, we do know that all things work together for God's glory and our good. All right, well, as always, I hope that you found this interesting. Make sure you're reading your Bible on a regular basis, as regular as you can. That's one of the best ways to ensure you serve the Lord. Not the only way, mind you, but one of the best ways. So let me know what you think. Give me feedback, ask questions, tell me what you're learning. Now, and it's been a while since I said this, go be a Berean. Hey, I read a book. Here we are again. Danny's book review, installment 16 this time, which just so happens to be a major coincidence because the last installment happened to be installment 15. So like if this one was some other number other than 16, I mean, wow, that would be really weird, right? Right. Yeah, I know. Stupid joke. But here we are. So this is the Logical Christian Podcast, Danny's book review. As I said, installment number 16. This is one of the random episode drops, basically. It's when I finish a book, I'll drop a book review. So look, I finished a book. I'm doing a book review as per the aforementioned plan, so let's hit it. Today's book is entitled Christless Christianity by Michael Horton. This is a 259-page book, and let me just say this, it is a dense book. It feels like more than 259 pages because it is very content-rich. It has so much information packed into those pages. It's just dense. But it's not a slog to get through because the content is fantastic, but it does take some work to move through it. Now, Michael Horton was born in 1964. He's a Reformed theologian. In fact, he's a Reformed systematic theology scholar. So, yes, he's a Calvinist. So everyone be afraid. No, don't be afraid. This book, although he does refer to some Reformed theology, is not a Calvinist book. This is more of a state of Christianity book, in my opinion, something that affects all Christians. He appears to be a busy man, with his fingers in various forms of media and instruction, teaching and writing, etc. He started, like most of us, at least over the last few generations, as an Arminian, someone who believes the opposite of Calvinist theology with regard to election and salvation, but he adopted the Calvinist theological view while he was in high school. Now look, some of you may be struggling with the idea of Calvinism, or God-ordained election to salvation. We've grown up in an era of free will, where seemingly every pastor gets to Romans 8 and 9 and caveats their sermon with some form of, but God doesn't make robots, in order to soften the blow of an all-sovereign God. Now, believe it or not, the Pilgrims, the Puritans, and the Baptist faith, it was all Reformed. The Arminian, or the free will teaching of the Baptist, Methodist, non-denominational, and most other churches is a very recent phenomenon. Now, look, back to Michael Horton. He said that when he read through Romans 9 as a high schooler, he threw his Bible across the room, something I don't recommend, because of the emotions that were evoked by reading and understanding the doctrines of election and predestination. Now, should it evoke such a strong emotion? Well, for some people, yeah. I mean, look, you've been taught wrong your whole life. Not nefariously wrong, not ill-intentioned, but to hear that you've been taught wrong, that free will exists, but not in the form you thought it did, it can be a hard pill to swallow at first. Anyway, look, you know me in rabbit trails, you know me in digression. Well, here we are again. Horton has multiple degrees. He's ordained a few times over. He's an author of many books, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, I'm apparently a failure at life as compared to Mr. Horton. That's okay. I'll be fine. This particular book was published in 2008. Now, that's 18 years ago for those of you that have trouble with math, but you'd never know it. The issues he discusses in this book are exactly the issues that still exist today. Now, I was probably about 3/4 of the way through the book before something caught my attention where I thought, what year was this book published? So, what's the book about? Well, let's do what I don't normally do. Let's flip to the back cover and read the summary. You'll never believe this, but it's a pretty good summary. Quote, "The church in America has been willingly taken captive. The captors are American culture and ideals, consumerism, pragmatism, self-sufficiency, individualism, positive thinking, personal prosperity, and nationalism. These are antithetical to the gospel, but we have nevertheless made them part and parcel with it. We are well on our way to a Christless Christianity." Now, if that doesn't sound like today to you, you're either living under a rock, incredibly naive, or willingly ignorant. Or maybe in the middle of this right now in a church that you probably need to get out of, and the sooner the better. I know you're not supposed to say that last little bit there to get out of the church, but look, have you known me to pull punches? Really? If you're in the middle of that kind of Christianity, get out. Continuing with the summary, quote, "The result, a faith that is, in Michael Horton's prophetic words, trivial, sentimental, affirming, and irrelevant. This alternative gospel is a message of moralism, personal comfort, self-help, self-improvement, and individualistic religion. It trivializes God, making him a means to our selfish ends." This is literally one of the biggest problems in evangelicalism today. We have lost the point of church. When Martin Luther, the father of the Protestant Reformation, expressed the desire to make the Bible available to everyone, his contemporary, a Roman Catholic and an opponent to what Luther was trying to do, told him, correctly might I add, that if he allowed the common man to read the Bible, it would result in the church splitting and the creation of many different faith beliefs or denominations. Luther pondered that briefly and stated, correctly might I add, that although that might be true, the Bible is for everyone. It's for the common man. It's for the lowest slave and the highest king, and everyone should be able to read it for himself. So that's where we are today. This is Horton's Christless Christianity. The reason we are where we are today is because we've allowed people to read the Bible and decide for themselves. The problem is that people are only reading some of the Bible, the portions they like, while ignoring the rest. And trust me when I say they will be severely judged for doing that. The Joel Osteens of the world, seemingly a very nice individual, very loving, will be judged harshly for leading people astray by only preaching some of the Bible. So this book really lays out the problem. Let's cover some of what he was talking about. How many of you have heard of Charles Finney? How many of you have heard of Billy Graham? Well, what do they have in common? They're both revivalist preachers. If you've ever seen an altar call, although maybe not the creator of it, but definitely the individual who made it a common practice, was Charles Finney. Graham followed in his footsteps with massive altar calls in huge, packed-to-the-rafters stadiums. Now, personally, the altar call makes me cringe. It's a heavily emotional, high-pressure period of time that a thankfully decreasing number of pastors feel they need to do at the end of church. You know, you play a hymn, you make your plea, and then the pastor stands there by himself, and then he prays and dismisses everyone. I hate to use the term, I simply despise the altar call. Well, Finney, known as the father of old revivalism, is the guy we can thank for making us cringe and the pastor look like a failure Sunday after Sunday. Horton hits two central themes in the book, or at least these seemed central to me: Finney and revivalism. Now, Finney is revered by many. Personally, and this book backs me up, I don't think he should be. His style of preaching and pressuring is not what the Bible tells us to do. Altar calls are not remotely close to anything that's in the Bible. Now, Horton does not have a favorable opinion of Finney either, and he really doesn't have a favorable position on revivals. And wow, have I been saying that for a number of years now? We've had 2 recent revivals in the United States, and the hype, again, in my opinion, was cringy. The Jesus Revolution in Newport Beach, California. It was a large baptism fest just a few years ago with around 4,500 participants. And then the Asbury Revival in Wilmore, Kentucky at Asbury University, where apparently more than 50,000 people came over the course of however many days or weeks that went on to feel God's presence. Or if I'd interpret that, they wanted an emotional high. Now, I won't claim that these so-called revivals did nothing. I won't claim that nobody was legitimately saved in these revivals. And I'm not dismissing that the salvation of even a single person is trivial. What I am claiming is that these revivals are highly emotional, they're high pressure, and they're short-lived. They don't have any lasting effects. Let me ask you, what has the lasting effect been of the Asbury Revival? Billy Graham, who preached to an estimated number of over 200 million people, estimated that out of all those who came flooding down through the stands to the central stage to ask Jesus into their hearts by repeating a prayer, only 25% were actually truly saved. That's what Graham estimated. Estimates today, after more study, points to maybe 6%. So if 1 million people came down to repeat a prayer, only 60,000 of those million were actually saved. Now, that's not a trivial number. I get it. But as a percentage, let's be honest, revivals are failures. I'm sure you've heard in the recent past how we need a revival in this country. Donald Trump, a Republican president, sort of conservative, an unrepentant, hell-bound sinner who feels he's never done anything he needs to ask forgiveness for and thinks his good works for the United States will get him into heaven, is credited by mostly charlatan, so-called alleged preachers, as well as some legitimate pastors and teachers, as contributing to the current American revival. No, he hasn't done that. He just simply hasn't. Horton makes it clear in this book that we don't need a revival. We don't need more Finneys. What we need is a reformation. And yeah, that's what I've been saying for years also. We need to declare so many denominations or sects of denominations, as well as preachers, heretics, because biblically, they literally are. He makes the case that the revivalist culture leads to the Arminian theological view, which is really just semi-Pelagianism, a declared heresy of old. I've been saying the same thing. I know that's not the thing we're supposed to say. We're not supposed to equate Arminianism and Pelagianism, but to be honest, again, for years, I can't logically see the difference. I really can't. I don't understand how people can. Horton speaks about the decline of American Christianity. He speaks of how people see God as a buddy, a friend, not a king, not as Lord. How the fear of God has faded away. How Christianity has become subjective rather than objective, and by doing so, it becomes a cure for what ails you. You feel bad? Well, you should try Christianity. He speaks of the heresy of Gnosticism and how it's crept into Christianity today. Quote, a religion that celebrates experience rather than doctrine, the personal rather than the institutional, the mythic and dreamlike over the cognitive, people's religion over official religion, soft, caring images of deity which can be described as feminine and androgynous over images of God as creator, redeemer, Lord, and judge. Horton hits another theme, maybe a secondary theme, law versus gospel, and how evangelicalism today has screwed up the emphasis, putting the onus on you and me to do, to give, to serve, to climb our way to God, rather than to simply receive, to allow God to come to us, as he promised. He said that for some reason, people seem to come to church with the idea that they must give rather than receive. Even the Second Vatican Council of the Roman Catholics defined Mass as a work of the people. But is it? It shouldn't be. It's a work of God. It's a work of Christ. He speaks about how we are told to serve and serve and serve and also serve. Get in a church, plug yourself in, get involved. And although there's nothing wrong with this, in fact, I encourage that, it's at a point in evangelicalism where that is the most important thing, to the detriment of being shepherded by a pastor. I can tell you that at my last church, despite my working to take load off myself and those I was leading as part of my role as children's department leader, more and more was lumped on those who were willing to be involved. I felt burnt out once, got out of most things for about a year, then got back involved again, and when I finally left the church a few years back, I was fried. I was doing so many things, I was absolutely burnt out, and I was angry. I wasn't getting fed. I dreaded going to church and so on, and that's not how it's supposed to be. But that's what a lot of churches have turned into, and because of our philosophy of do, we've lost the grace that comes from Jesus and the peace that comes from that grace. He speaks about the role of the church, how we've lost our way. Quote, "The church has a very narrow commission. It is not called to be an alternative neighborhood, circle of friends, political action committee, social club, or public service agency. It is called to deliver Christ so clearly and fully that believers are prepared to be salt and light in the worldly stations to which God has called them." And wow, is that true? How many churches, maybe yours, maybe my previous one, tell you that they're a community church, that they are a neighborhood church, that they are desiring to get into the community, and they set up service projects all over the place and try to be involved in parades and festivals. That's not what the church is called to do. He also speaks of pastors not being called to promote a specific political candidate or something like that. Now, I kind of agree with that, only kind of. I think that pastors should, through the preaching of the text, make it abundantly clear which candidate most closely upholds the values of a Christian. He may not need to say names, but he should be very clear. So, as Horton wraps up the book, he returns once more to his main themes. He quotes Dietrich Bonhoeffer after a lecture tour of the U.S. before going back to his home in Germany, eventually to be arrested and killed in a concentration camp, as saying, quote, "American religion is Protestantism without the Reformation." Bonhoeffer goes on to say, quote, "God has granted American Christianity no reformation. He has given it strong revivalist preachers, churchmen, and theologians, but no reformation of the Church of Jesus Christ by the Word of God. In American theology, Christianity is still essentially religion and ethics. Because of this, the person and work of Christ must, for theology, sink into the background and in the long run remain misunderstood because it is not recognized as the sole ground of radical judgment and radical forgiveness." I'd guess that if you listen to that statement as an American Christian, you may be a bit offended. But is he wrong? And I'd argue, no, he's not. He's not wrong. He's not even close to wrong. We are not a Reformationist society. We're a revivalist society. And that is absolutely not the same thing. In fact, that's not a good thing. With regard to the gospel, he wants to make it clearly understood that we, Christians, are never self-feeders. We must be part of a church, a member of a church, fed and grown by the pastors and elders. To think that we can do this via live stream or podcasts or books or whatever is a recipe for disaster. But we've not only become isolationist and individualist, most people have relegated God and His Word to a position of irrelevance. It's a nice book. It's full of interesting stories and morality tales, has some good rules to follow, but most Christians don't even expect to hear God speaking through His Word anymore. We've fallen very far. So are we living in an era of Christless Christianity in America? And the answer is, boy, I tell you, if we're not, it sure appears that way, and if we aren't there yet, we're getting close. We've benefited from the Reformation. We've never had to do the work ourselves. And now we've taken the hard-fought faith and the right to worship and turned it into easy believism. We've listened to emotionally manipulative, high-energy con men and carnival barkers, giving us all the feels, high and low, without the substance, the deep, rich, theological truth behind the words they say. We've exchanged grace for service, creeds for deeds, and the gospel for the law. We've literally walked into the jail cell and closed the door on ourselves. So recommendation time. 1,000,000 times yes. This was a deep, rich, let me re-say it again, dense, slow-reading book full of truth. Some points are going to sting, possibly make you mad as you see yourself, as you see your pastor, or you see your church in Horton's writings. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with being angry. What you need to ask yourself is what he wrote 18 years ago, is that true for you today? So yes, I would definitely recommend this book. This is as applicable today as it ever was, and I have a feeling will be relevant into the distant future as well. And that'll do it for this book review, installment 16 of Danny's book review on the Logical Christian Podcast. So, on behalf of me and all my staff, which consists of me, let me encourage you once more, get up, get off your duff, and go read something. Well, we've reached the end of this episode of the Logical Christian Podcast. I know, I'm not happy about it either. If you found value in this podcast, like, rate, review, and share if you wouldn't mind. Don't forget to check the show notes for links and contact info. Against logic, there is no armor like ignorance. Lawrence J. Peter. If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Jesus. So stay in the word, stay logical, stay faithful, and until next time, God bless.